visualize success. Cool, great. But if you don't also visualize the failure, and more importantly, in my opinion, the recovery and what that looks like, then you're actually not going to be prepared. Because as soon as you don't hit that success, you get in your head again, right? And so far too often, when you're training and you're in practice, failure is inevitable. Mistakes happen. They will happen. Everyone understands that. Everybody knows that. And so from a physical standpoint, you're preparing. But from a mental standpoint, if you're not also doing the same type of reps in your head, you're not going through what a miss looks like and how you recover from that, or if you fall and tumble, or if whatever the situation is, right? If you slip on the ice, if you're playing hockey. And so if you don't actually go through the process of what that looks like, then you're not training your brain to be prepared for that situation. And so that's one of the things that I think is most helpful is really you're setting yourself up for success to be able when you can recover, right? And when you can very clearly ask yourself and answer, what is the next best move for me to make? And so for me, that training process is showing your brain, one, what's possible with success, but two, how to recover when you don't hit that right away so that you can keep going.
Well, welcome everybody back to the Sean Trey Show. I've got an awesome guest with me today. Would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
I'd love to. My name is David Hitz. I am a mental performance coach using neuroscience to help athletes to improve their game, as well as COO of a company called Athlete Narrative, where we help athletes to get recruited and play in college.
That's awesome. How did you start out down this path? What was it that pulled you? Like, why did you say I wanted to start working with athletes?
I didn't at first, actually. It kind of happened organically. And so part of how far back do you want me to go?
Dude, as far as you want to go, man. I'm here all night.
So part of my origin story started in 2020 when my older brother, Skylar, died by suicide, and really rocked our world, obviously, as a family. And it was one of those events that, you have to kind of decide what your path forward is. Are you going to allow grief to kind of keep a hold of you, or are you going to take control of that process a little bit more? How am I taking care of myself? All those things, right? And so I looked at myself and was just like, am I taking care of myself? What does that look like? Could I take better care of myself? And so in that process, I started to figure out, okay, I need to be more intentional with my spiritual health. I need to be more intentional with my mental health, with my physical health. And during that time, I had a mentor that had kind of slapped me across the face, was like, dude, I have told you about neuroscience for years and years. And she's someone that is a well-respected female all over the country in conflict resolution and neuroscience. And we mediated together and would do some trainings. And she was like, now's the time. And so she and I actually together went through this course through MIT in neuroscience. And it really started me down this path of understanding how the brain really impacts our lives, and an understanding of, by simply being more intentional, and yes, it's more complex, but by being more intentional with how you operate and what you do, it allows you to have a much more clear path forward. And so as I started down on that road, working on my own stuff, it just naturally happened that people would ask me, hey, what are you doing? Things are different. You seem in a better place, all of this. And so I'd kind of share that. And so I kind of transitioned from doing some of the work that I was doing with teams and conflict resolution sort of stuff, because that's what my master's is in, to coaching with mental performance and individuals and things like that. And so I did that for a few years. And then one of my friends came to me and said, hey, what do you know about running tech teams? And I said, well, tech, a little bit. I said, teams 100%. I said, name the size of the team. At that point, I had run teams from, couple people up to 250 people, and was one of those things that I said, what do you got? Right. And so he said, well, we're kind of developing this app and blah, blah, blah. And I think you'd be a really good fit. And so I started with Athlete Narrative. And as a company, we started with social branding, right? Helping athletes to position themselves better for NIL opportunities and things like that. And so by working with these athletes, it just naturally happened that I had several people ask, hey, do you do this coaching for athletes as well? I said, yeah, sure. Why not? Right. The principles apply. And as I got into it more and more, I just really liked working with athletes and kind of just hit my stride. And so that's how it all happened, where I went from where I was to working primarily with athletes. And I will say not everyone that I work with is an athlete. But again, the rules, the principles, the foundational things that I teach and work with people on apply.
That's a powerful story. It's interesting too that I talked earlier this week with Brian May, and sorry, not Brian May, Jimmy May. He's a Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL, ran a bunch of the SEAL teams on the West Coast, and it was interesting because he's now running a group to help SEALs fight in combat depression and suicide. And it was interesting that for him, when he's like talking about how he was faced with a choice of making these changes. And there was a lot of the mentality that he said that people have to, he's been seeing more and more and more about how he's trying to change the way he looks at things and helps people approach things. And, because it's everything that we work through in life. I had something that happened, and it was really tough for me last week. I have a financial podcast because I did not grow up good with money. And I started my Growing Money podcast to learn about money and to talk to these financial professionals. And in that process, I met this one guy, and he became my CFP. Really great guy. I still love him to pieces. Awesome person, awesome human being. His business went under, and he had to call to inform me that he wouldn't be able to help me with my finances anymore, and that he had to go back and get a job. And dude, the panic that started to come in at that moment, because I was just like, here's a person that I'm depending upon. If we're heading into tax season, and I'm just like, oh God, But I had to sit there and slow myself down and just start to try to center for a second. I played not crazy high, but I played volleyball at a collegiate level. I played high school, played in college. We weren't D1 or anything. It was NAIA, D3, but still we played against some top teams, man. And
it's still hard to be a college athlete. I don't care what division you're in. It's freaking hard.
It was hard. And I the first 2 years I played all the time, got in my junior year, rode the bench. But I mean, the times that I was in the game, there was one time that we were playing against Berkeley. We were playing against Cal. And my coach had pulled our star player out, and he's like, Sean, you're in. And I'm like, oh dear God, man, pressure's on me right now. The star guy is swinging and missing. And at that moment, one of the things that I had been doing before I was before I got into, played collegiate volleyball, I had done martial arts a long time. I'm a black belt in Japanese style jiu-jitsu, which is kind of like judo.
Okay.
And I got really good at sparring and getting tossed around a room and these pressure situations. And when I moved into the game, I'm like, well, what's the worst that can happen? What's the worst that can happen? I make a fool of myself, but I just had to get my mind right. And I just went in and executed. And my coach looked at me, he's like, Sean, do the same thing we're doing in practice. dude, you've done this a million times. But when you get in your head, man, it makes you feel like the worst case scenarios running over and over again. And I wanted to ask you this because you talk about training the brain like the body, but like, what does that look like? You know, how does a person who's getting ready to go from here to here even do that? You know?
Yeah. So there's obviously there's several layers to it, and there's different tools that we pull from in the coaching. And one of the things that I feel like is most helpful in those situations is, so you talked about your coach saying, hey, just do it like we do in practice, right? That's from a very physical side of things, right?
Yeah.
And you rely on reactions that you've patterned over time, right? If X happens, I do Y. Cool,
Yeah.
great. But we have to approach the brain in a very similar way. And one of the best tools that I believe helps in this is visualization. And one of the things that a lot of people talk about for when you are doing visualization is they say, hey, just put in the reps, right? Visualize success. Cool, great. But if you don't also visualize the failure, and more importantly, in my opinion, the recovery and what that looks like, then you're actually not going to be prepared. Because as soon as you don't hit that success, you get in your head again, right? And so far too often, when you're training and you're in practice, failure is inevitable. Mistakes happen. They will happen. Everyone understands that. Everybody knows that. And so from a physical standpoint, you're preparing. But from a mental standpoint, if you're not also doing the same type of reps in your head, you're not going through what a miss looks like and how you recover from that, or if you fall and tumble, or if whatever the situation is, right? If you slip on the ice, if you're playing hockey. And so if you don't actually go through the process of what that looks like, then you're not training your brain to be prepared for that situation. And so that's one of the things that I think is most helpful is really you're setting yourself up for success to be able when you can recover, right? And when you can very clearly ask yourself and answer, what is the next best move for me to make? And so for me, that training process is showing your brain, one, what's possible with success, but two, how to recover when you don't hit that right away so that you can keep going.
Love it, and makes sense because I was thinking about, one of the things that we train in judo is you train the throws. You train the throws. You train the throws. You like, yeah, I'm going to succeed. But then one of the big core parts of it is working on counters. Like when they start doing something, like let's start prepping for failure. Let's start prepping for when things go wrong. And there's a whole art to counters of them doing a move on you that you just messed up. I was one of my friends, Trey. He worked with the helicopters, the Night Stalkers. The Night Stalkers are the helicopters that work with the special forces. So if the Navy SEALs or Delta or anyone is flying into a location, they are flying on one of these little tiny helicopters. And there's these teams he was one of the teams that kept these helicopters working in top shape. Now, he would tell me before a mission, he would see these guys and they would tape out on the ground the shape of a building. And they would then run through it's just taped out on the field. They're like, they already done all this prep before. And one of the things that he was saying is like they were planning for every possible scenario. And some of those were things going horribly wrong. And that was what he said. It's like, they're not planning for every right scenario. They're planning for we cleared this room and we walk in and suddenly some dude jumps out from over there because we didn't look there, Right. That's what they prep for.
That's, if you don't approach it in that way, then inevitably you're going to get stuck. Right. Yeah. And that's where, one of the things that I work with people on is when you do get stuck, okay, how do we recover quickly? Right. And more often than not, for me, I use kind of a combination of breath work and somatics and things like that. But really it's giving yourself all the tools that you need in order to intentionally move forward. regardless of where
Yeah.
you're at.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because a lot of athletes, a lot of people in general think they're mentally tough until they're not. Even myself included. I'm like, I've got it together, and suddenly you hit some wall. You're like, oh my gosh,
And then your accountant
catastrophe.
calls and he's like, dude, bad news.
Yeah, bad news. The firm's closed. And you're like, oh God, But what's the difference between confidence and like a fragile ego, Because it's like, I've seen people that acted all tough. And then I remember like one of the best examples when I was in high school, we went paintball. Like when paintball was first starting to get like fun.
Yeah. I'm going to get a little risque here. I've got a scar right here. I don't know if you can see that from a paintball.
Dude,
Yeah.
man. But we were like rolling up to the paintball place, and this one dude was always talking. You remember, the guy in high school is like, yeah, man, I can climb that. Dude, yeah, I benched 5. I did. Just always talking. Paintballs start flying. He was hiding behind the barrier, crying. And I was like, what happened, man? And he's like, I don't know. And everyone was laughing. He took it in stride. He's like, I don't know what happened, man. I just lost it. But it was interesting too, because he was the tough guy in our class. But yet when things got tough, there was this fragile like nature to that, there's no judgment, but I was just trying to figure out what happens there,
Yeah, I think one of the things that helps with confidence is clarity. Clarity with who you are and who you are becoming. And so as I work with athletes and humans in general, right, we talk about that training of the brain. One of the things that I have everybody do is work on future self meditation. What does that look like? In an ideal world, what are you like in your future? And then we continue to kind of train the brain in that of what's possible. What does that look like? And the more detailed, the better. And as you get more clear with that, it then allows you to get more clear with what your next steps are. And so that clarity helps build the confidence of where you're going. And so when you get into those situations, if you are more sure of where you're going, you just have to take the next step. Right?
Yeah.
That's what it's about. And so that confidence comes from getting clear with who you are, where you're going, right? And some of that is, understanding kind of the bigger purpose of why you're doing what you're doing. What is that why? There's a killer YouTube video that my dad sent me probably a little over a year ago. And it's this demonstration of why the why matters. And there's this person that's giving a lecture and whatever, they say, okay, hey, this person in the audience, go ahead and sing this song. And he starts singing and he's got a good voice, right? And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Now I want you to sing it again, but this is the scenario that you're in. This is the why behind it. And he just kind of gives him 10, 15 seconds. And then the guy starts belting it. But there's so much more heart and feeling, and it really shifts 100%. And it was such a simple demonstration of how important the why is. And so you look at who you are, where you're going, but you bring in that why. Why are you doing any of it?
Yeah.
What matters most? And that then again just helps build that confidence, because crap happens. Life happens.
Yeah.
And so in those moments you choose, is life happening to me or is life happening for me? Am I the victim or the benefactor? And so it helps you to just keep moving forward, the next best move.
Two things I want to unpack there. I like them both. I studied acting, one of my many life iterations. Weird things, weird shit that Sean has done. And it was interesting because I studied with Ivana Chubbuck, who's got this great method. And actually, she's an awesome, awesome individual, awesome teacher. I think more people should study acting because you learn a lot about your life and yourself. And it's a really powerful thing. Because one of the things that's really powerful about Ivana Chubbuck's method is that she talks about goals and objectives, and they're a core part of your character. And you have to know what your character, your overarching objective, and then each scene has an objective, so in some character, we might be trying to do something. Even a villain, they have these overarching objectives as well. Is
Totally.
it to be loved? Is it to be accepted? Is it to be, what is it? And you look at those things, and then as the character moves through it, it gives them this purpose. Because if you don't have those objectives, it's kind of hard to anchor into something. And I mean, for an athlete, what is it that you're doing it for? For a person that's a business person, what is it that you're doing it for? Going back to the story about the objectives, like, it gives meaning to something. I when I was in my writing phase, I was writing this, like, teaching phase. I was teaching students about writing, and I said, okay, let's take two versions of a story. Story number one: you are going up to rescue someone in the building next door. Okay, so you walk out of your house, you walk across the street, you press the later button, you go up. Hey guys, ready to go? Okay, let's go. You come back down, done. Moving over, right? There's not much challenge, you have an objective, but like, when you start putting the challenges in there and the obstacles, all right, well, you start going from here to there. The elevator's down. Okay, well, you got to walk up all those flights of steps. Okay, let's make it harder. It's filled with, like, mafia. All right. Wow, that's really also, there's mafia in the building. And then the mafia, everyone knows Kung Fu. Okay. Oh, dude, now we're getting harder. All right.
The ninja mafia.
Yeah. Your brother's upstairs in the building has been taken over by, like, the mafia drug lord dealer Kung Fu guy. Sounds crazy, but that's the story for the movie The Raid, which was an absolute hit because this guy had to go into a building and fight his way up all of these levels in this building with some new bad guy in each level. It was one of the best indie movies that ever came out. And it was so good because you have a strong why, and then you have all these obstacles in the way. If you have anybody who hasn't watched The Raid, go watch The Raid. The Raid 1 is amazing. The Raid 2, not the same, but The Raid 1 was so good. It's an Indonesian movie. It's ridiculously good, which leads to my next question. As people are going through this stuff and are trying to improve and trying to get to a place where they can get and train their brain, you focus on neuroplasticity. Where do people misunderstand it the most? And what can people do to understand it and kind of apply it to their lives?
Yeah. So neuroplasticity, in the most simple way, is your brain will continue to learn, grow, change, evolve over time, right? The beauty of the brain, and just overall as we learn and grow from kids and then up, is you kind of get some of this hardware-software relationship, and your brain's still developing and all these things till you're about 25. And that's all great, right? We need the brain development. We need all these things. But that doesn't mean that when your brain is physically done developing, that you can't still learn, right? And so you've talked about the multiple iterations of Sean, right? The acting, the writing, right? There's music. It clearly is a big part of your life. You've got guitars on the wall. You've got an amp behind you, which means you don't just have it up for decoration. And there's one guitar leaning in the corner, right? So, like, there's multiple iterations. And so for me, when you look at neuroplasticity, it's that brain's ability to learn, grow, and evolve. And as you have an understanding of that, one of the things that makes the difference is your brain is going to evolve and learn and grow regardless. But if you are intentional with how you're learning and growing, you can really tap into the power of neuroplasticity that we all have in us to become that version of yourself that you really want to become. And there's certain principles of neuroplasticity that help us to more or less hack the system, right? You've got time and repetitions and certain windows of time within the day that your brain is a little bit more able and malleable to learn, grow, kind of solidify some of these principles, right? And so, anchoring the day with certain things in the morning and certain things in the evening, that hour window right after you wake up, right before you go to bed, as long as you've got a regular routine, really helps you to kind of tap into the power of that neuroplasticity and be much more intentional with your growth and the changes that are going to occur. And so for me, neuroplasticity gives me hope that we're not stuck, right? We're not always going to be where we're at. We can change. You can teach an old dog new tricks, right? That old adage of, oh, you can't teach BS, right? Like that's not the case, right? And anybody that's actually adopted a dog or any of that sort of rehomed, you can teach dogs new. And so it's kind of a funny phrase that people have, but we really can change. And so by understanding simple principles about how the brain works, it allows you to evolve and change and learn in a very intentional way.
I love that. One of the things too is like that I was thinking about is the intentional way. It reminds me of alignment, who you are and who you want to become, because I might be here, but I want to be here. I want to go from Sean, who's doing podcasts in his office late at night, to Sean that's got the podcast being like his main thing. Like I think that's my dream. But if I want to get from here to here, I have to align and then pick that path and then make the things happen. Like, how do you actually measure someone being in alignment? And am I getting alignment right, or am I completely off base on this?
So I think one thing, like measuring it, there's not KPIs for something like that, right? You don't have metrics that you're like keeping track of and all of that. But there is really an overarching calm and peace and kind of feeling that comes when you are more in alignment. And so one of the things that for me was really helpful is understanding impossible goals, and the idea of the bigger you dream, the bigger the goal, the more clear the path. And there's lots of people who have talked about this. One book that I really like is 10X is Easier Than 2X by Ben Hardy. And it very clearly lines out that you can grow 2X in a lot of different ways, right? Almost innumerable. Like if you want to just get that much better at this, just literally like 2X, you can choose so many different paths. But if you want to go 10X, or you want to go 100X, or whatever that larger number X is, the more clear the path becomes. If you want to play professional soccer, you don't have a million paths that are going to take you there. You've got like 2, maybe 3 if you're super, super connected. But it's very clear how you get there, right? And that's a big goal. And so the bigger the goal, the bigger the dream, the more clear the path is to get there. And so if it doesn't freak you out a bit, Sean, of where you want to go, then you're probably not thinking big enough, because the path won't be as clear.
That's such a great statement. And I love that, because it's like sometimes I think that so many people do get scared of dreaming big, though. They get scared and we play small. But I think that I love the biggest dreams that I've ever had have felt like the things lined up in front of me. And that's just awesome, because it seemed straightforward, and it seemed like it was just like you said, though, like you do this step and then the next step becomes the next step that you take. And it's like things become simple when you can kind of simplify it that. But when a person starts spiraling, and you start getting sidetracked, or you start getting up in your head, what are some of the simplest tools or things that they can do to kind of keep themselves from spiraling? Is it breath work? Are there other things that help?
Yeah. So it depends a little bit on how big of a spiral we're talking about, right? If you are in the middle of a panic attack, then there's certain things that we're going to do a little bit different than if you're just kind of feeling a little anxious or unclear. And so generally speaking, breathwork is a very helpful tool for calming down your nervous system, bringing you to a nice baseline that allows you to be more clear and more calm. And so when I'm working with people and we're doing that future self meditation, I always have them do breath work before that to bring that baseline down, to get themselves into a physiological state that is calmer, more able to actually dream big and to picture that future version of yourself. But there's going to be times where you get caught up. And so, in your words, kind of spiral, right? And so, sometimes it is breath work. If you are not in like full on panic, right, then some of the ways to like monk breathing, essentially, right, where you're humming, right? And one of the things that people, coaches all the time will tell you, hey, take a deep breath, Cool, great. But if you don't control that exhale, then you're going to continue spiking your nervous system. And so you can try and breathe as deep as you want, but if you can't control that exhale, that's not going to really bring down that baseline, right, to get you nice and more steady. And so focusing on the exhale, a controlled exhale, the breathing, like that monk breathing right there, if you are starting to panic a little bit, it can be very helpful because the humming actually is going to help produce nitric oxide and do other things. I'm a big fan of cold. Your face. If you're having a panic attack, don't jump in a cold tub, right? Like you're going to just, but your face, the back of your neck, things like that can be a quick little, the other thing that I'm a huge fan of is the body. Move the body. Okay. When we get stuck mentally, often we freeze, right? We talk about flight, fright, or freeze, right? And so we kind of can shut down and just freeze oftentimes when we get into those situations. And so physically, we don't even move. And the problem is we've kind of thought ourselves into this situation. So it's going to be very hard to just think your way out of it. And so you actually need to move the body. So I'm a big fan of like just doing some body weight squats, moving the body, getting the blood flow, getting everything moving, oxygen to the brain, all of that. And so different tools to pull from when you start to kind of get out of alignment there to bring yourself back to a place where you can then more clearly look forward at, okay, what is the next best move?
I love that. I had heard people talking about like cognitive questions too, to try to get themselves out of some of those spots too.
Sure.
Can you tell me about that?
100%. Like that's where, like I said, oftentimes we've kind of thought our way into this mess. By and large, when we are experiencing anxiety, it's 9 times out of 10, it's in our head. It's not because there's actually a physical threat that is requiring our system to light up, right? It's we've thought about worst case scenarios. We've thought about, oh my gosh, what if this happens? And then this is going to happen. Oh, it's all going to go, like, we just start step by step down that spiral. And so being able to question, doubt the doubts, right? Like if instead of saying, well, what if this happens and everything's going to go to hell, right? Well, what if it doesn't happen? Right? What if I fail at this? Cool. What if you succeed?
Right.
Instead of what if everything goes wrong, what does that look like if it goes right? And being able to just throw a little bit of a wrench in that and pause can really help you understand that, oh, I guess there is a different path. There is a different feeling. And so the thing that's crazy is your brain doesn't know what reality is. Okay. Those feelings of anxiety and things that shut down, it doesn't matter if there's really a bear chasing you or not. You have told your whole system there's a bear chasing me. Right. This is how we have to react. We go into that self-preservation. And so you have to question of, more or less what's real. Right. Am I actually am I in danger right now? Look around, right? And if you're not, okay, cool. That's one thing to check off that list of questioning and doubting those doubts. And so I'm a big fan of working on that internal narrative and working to build yourself up instead of tear yourself down. Right? Look for the ways again that life is happening to you instead, like for you instead of to you. And so, being able to kind of glean what you can from those different situations is really helpful.
I love that. It's one of the things too, is because if you can reframe things and look at it, I love that. First of all, the reframe of life is happening for you instead of to you, because it's so true. And it's like you are, but it's all about being proactive versus reactive as well. You have to sit there and to be a proactive force in your life instead of just going through it again and again and again, But
Yeah.
one of the things too is like I try to find this, and this is good for business entrepreneurs. It's good for anyone that if you feel stuck, there are things that you can do. There are tools that you can do, because it's like you might have used these techniques for just athletes, but man, it works for everyone, because everyone deals with the mental overwhelm and these challenges
Uh-huh.
at times. How do you think people can apply these tools in other areas of life besides just sports?
Um, so if you recall, I actually kind of later transitioned toward athletes.
Mhm.
And so I actually have worked with entrepreneurs quite a bit. Having been an entrepreneur, having grown up in an entrepreneurial family, it's one of those things that was very natural for me because I understand what that is like. And so I
Mhm.
actually have worked with several entrepreneurs over the years. And and so one of the things that's interesting is when you when you're working on marketing and you have to kind of more or less pick a lane. Where it gets hard is when the things that you teach people have overlap into other areas, right? Those foundational principles of taking an intentional approach to your life is applicable to all humans, right? But to be direct, if I come out and I say, hey, what I teach helped everybody, then everybody says, BS. Like, there's no way that these things can actually help everybody. And so, because I work with athletes the most, it's much more natural for me to gear my marketing towards that. And I recently, so one of the things that after my brother passed, I kind of was like, okay, I want to help people. I want to, my bigger why is to invite more light into the world. And as I look for the different ways to do that, one of the things that kind of kept coming up over and over again was putting something together that was like a course. And originally I was going to kind of like build this whole like 3-month thing, and it's going to be all these, check boxes and whatever, and this whole course. And as I was doing my own work and my own future self meditation and all that stuff that I coach people on, it was very clear to me that the answer was a mini course, and it had to be
Mhm.
$39 because my brother was 39 when he passed.
Mm.
And for me, this last year, as I was leading up to my 39th birthday, it was very clear what I needed to do. So I built this mini course. I got it done, I think, like 2 days before I turned 39.
Mm.
It was a lot of late nights, a lot of work and everything, but it was putting all these things together to just start the foundation, right? And in the frequently asked questions, I put in there, hey, is this just for athletes? No, it's for all humans. But the problem is you have to kind of market a little bit to certain populations, or you have to kind of pick a
Mhm.
lane. And so for me, most of my work is with athletes, but the things that I work with people on are 100% applicable to everybody. And so whether you feel stuck as an entrepreneur, whether you feel stuck as a parent, as whatever that is, the things that can help you to calm down your nervous system and to take that intentional approach of forward looking and making that next best move are applicable, period, to everybody.
I love that. If someone wants to find out more about what you do and the information you teach, where should they look for that information?
I would direct them to my socials are a good spot, right? LinkedIn, I'm fairly active on, and Instagram, it is the NeuroPro. But for looking at a lot of those foundational pieces, goneuropro.com is where you can see about the course, a bit of the backstory, and the things that I work with people on. Like I said, part of my bigger why is to invite more light, and I'm only one person. I don't have unlimited bandwidth, and so this was a huge labor of love to make it very accessible for everybody to start building that life of intention that they want.